But to all of the folks who are joining us in the audience tonight, welcome to tonight's panel discussion about the documentary Alone Again in Fukushima. My name is Joanna Sierks-Smith, and I'm the Associate Director for State Outreach at Carolina Public Humanities, and I'll be helping to moderate tonight's discussion. Tonight's event is a collaboration between 3 different units at UNC, Carolina Public Humanities, the Carolina Asia Center, and the Religious Studies Department. And it is also being generously sponsored by Theater for All, which is an initiative devoted to making performances accessible to all audiences. And they are the ones that we can thank for the subtitles and the voiceovers that allowed you all to watch this film. And I want to extend a special thank you to Kevin Fogg and to Shuyi Lee, as well as to Barbara Ambros for all their work in putting together tonight's discussion. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by 2 very special guests, as well as one of UNC's own professors. First, I want to welcome Ms. Nakamura Mayu, who is a filmmaker who earned her MFA from the Graduate Film Program at NYU. She made her directorial debut in 2006 with a fiction feature film, Summer of Stickleback, followed by documentary features that include Lonely Swallows, Living as the Children of Migrant Workers in 2012, and Watch Out for the Patriot, Kunio Suzuki in 2020. And in addition to Alone Again in Fukushima, her latest work is a fiction feature film called Intimate Stranger. Next, we are joined by Mr. Matsumura Naoto, who you will recognize as the subject of the film Alone Again in Fukushima. He spent most of his life in his native town of Tomioka, and there he worked in construction for many years and was in fact involved in the construction of Fukushima's first and second nuclear power plants. And as this film documents, at the time of the nuclear disaster in 2011, he decided to remain in his home, and he has spent the years since then taking care of the animals who were left behind during the mass evacuation of the nuclear zone. And tonight, Mr. Matsumura is joining us along with an interpreter, Mizime. And we will work to minimize any kind of audio issues that you might hear around that, but we ask you to please be patient with us on that. And lastly, we are joined tonight by Barbara Ambros, who is going to be joining me as an interlocutor tonight. And she is a professor in East Asian religions in the Department of Religious Studies at UNC. Her research on Japanese religions focuses on human-animal relationships, gender studies, and place and space. And recent publications include Bones of Contention, Animals and Religion in Contemporary Japan, which was published in 2012, and Buddhist Beasts, Reflections on Animals in Asian Religions and Culture, which was a co-edited special issue of the magazine Religion, which was released in 2019. And she's currently working on a book project on Buddhist animal release rituals in early modern Japan. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Ambros in the past within the Religious Studies Department at UNC, where I'm also a PhD candidate. And although my work is on American religion, my research is on animal-human relationships and shifting sensibilities around nature. And so like Barbara, I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation tonight that will in part tease out those very themes by honing in on the story of Mr. Matsumura. Now, we hope that many of you have gotten a chance by now to view the documentary Alone Again in Fukushima through the link that we shared ahead of time. But even if you have not, I think you will still be able to benefit through this conversation around this truly extraordinary story. And we invite you, our audience members, to share questions with our panelists at any time through the Q&A button right at the bottom of your screen. And we'll get to as many of those questions as possible. And last but not least, if you have any technical questions during today's event, you can also just drop those right in the chat, and Shuyi and Kevin will be there behind the scenes to help you out. So with that, I'd like to hand over the floor to Dr. Ambros to open up our conversation with a few questions.
Thank you, Joanna, for the very generous introduction. I'm so pleased to be here and feel privileged to have this conversation with Ms. Nakamura and Mr. Matsumura. And I want to open up the floor with a question to Ms. Nakamura. So what was it about this story that compelled you to make your first documentary and then brought you back again and again over the course of 10 years to make this sequel?
I'm just kind of waiting for Miyoko to finish translating. So what I was interested in was I've been making a television documentary for years, and after the great, you know, Eastern earthquake, I made like a lot of documentaries in that region, but I wanted to focus on Fukushima, and I found out about Naoto on like international like network like Vice and whatnot, but he wasn't reported to on a major television in network in Japan for some reason. So I decided to make a film about him because I think at the time, you know, it was kind of not, you know, allowed to kind of broadcast about him on television because, you know, he wasn't allowed to stay there in the nuclear zone. So I think, you know, major network couldn't cover. So I decided to make a film. And after I started making a film, like a first film, I made a first film after, you know, visiting him for like a year. I decided to go back just because, you know, a lot of the television people, they only go there for once and then they never come back. But I wanted to keep going back and kind of follow, you know, how the town's going to change and how people would change in years. And that actually took me 8 years, which is, you know, this is our eighth year. So
That's a really long time spending on a project, and I think it's a really wonderful thing that you have documented how things have changed over time. And there's actually a question from one of our audience members who asked, how did you cope with the emotional trauma involved in making this film? Because we can imagine that this was not always easy.
emotional trauma meaning the visiting the area, or I'm not sure.
Yes, and also you're dealing with difficult topics. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure this was not easy. This was probably hard to digest. It was hard to watch.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't easy to go there to begin with because, you know, there was no transportation to begin with, and I had a driver's license, but I took it in while I was living in US, and I wasn't driving for 10 years, so I had to retake the driving, you know, driver's license, and you know, I have to learn it again. And so I had to rent a car, go there, and there was like, you know, no stores in the place. So you have to buy things before you visit because there's no running water, there's nothing, basically. So it's, in the beginning, it was a little bit scary because it's like, you know, you can't really, I've been to many countries, but I've never been to a place where people are not like living there. But to my surprise, I was surprised that the place was sort of like a paradise for animals and for an auto because there are so many animals roaming around freely and, you know, like without, you know, people like inhibiting them. So it's, in a way, I was kind of healed in a way that, you know, it was comforting to see the animals so close. And I always lived in the city, so I never been close to cows so much. I've never seen cows giving birth, which I kind of experienced firsthand. So it was kind of an interesting experience. Like it was a scary at first, but it just became like a comforting experience, like visiting there.
Thank you. Well, I'll turn it over to Joanna for some more questions.
Yeah, so especially, you know, hearing you describe the hardships of daily life in the nuclear zone, this brings up these questions of motivation. And so these are questions for Mr. Matsumura. We're already getting audience members asking about motivation. You know, what allowed you to put yourself in a dangerous situation, to put these animals' needs, it seems, in ways ahead of your own. And so folks are curious, not just about what motivated you in that moment, but about perhaps what's changed in your motivations over the years.
Can you hear us?
当時思い出すと、逃げようと思えばもう避難もできる選択肢もあったわけです。
Of course, when I reflect back upon those times, there was the choice to evacuate from that area, of course.
でも何日か動物の面倒見てるうちに、俺ここから出ちゃったらこいつらみんな餓死するなと思った時にはもうしょうがないから一緒に残るしかないってなったわけだ。
But as I was taking care of these animals, after day went by, with me and the animals and myself taking care of them, I began to think that, well, if I leave, then these animals have no choice but to starve to death. So I ultimately decided that really I have no choice but to stay.
で毎日夜一人で酒飲みながら暗いとこでもう思いにふけるわけだ。なんでこうなったんだ、何が悪かったんだ、何が問題なんだ。結果的に自分の中ではやっぱりテプコがもうとんでもないやつなんだってなったわけだ。
And while I was spending my time with these animals in the disaster-stricken zone, I would go home at night, and because there was, of course, no utilities, no electricity, I would be at my home in this very dark room and always kind of thinking about why did this situation come to this point? What is to blame? Why do we have to suffer like this? And I always came to the conclusion that really it's TEPCO that is to blame here.
当時1ヶ月後には東京に出てきてテプコの本店に行ってこの野郎ってやってたもんな。
And then I remember that a month after that, I would visit Tokyo and I went to TEPCO's headquarters and really cause a ruckus, really complain to them. Why did you do this to us?
いや本当にあの頃はもう自分でもう心置きなくもう何でもできることもう後悔しないようにって全てやってやったと思ってもう決心したから。
I was very resolute to do everything that I was able to do so that I was left with no regrets, just basically anything.
あの時犬にも約束したんだ。心配するんだって。飯くらいは俺餌食べはなんとか覚悟してやるって。
I remember talking to the dogs and saying, "Don't worry, I will be here to feed you, so don't you worry."
Wonderful. And so
あの時に本当にたまたまだったんだけど、爆発してから1週間後か10日後だったな。AP 通信が取材に入ってた。それがばったりこう行っちゃって、AP 通信の取材を受けたのが始まりだったな。その時に考えた。外国のメディアは使えるって。
And it just happened so that about 10 days after the nuclear plant exploded, a reporter from AP came to cover my story. And then I realized I can use the international media, actually.
で、ここから発信するのには海外のメディアを使えばいいって考えたわけ。
And to voice my opinion, that is the way, really, to use the international media as my voice, as my microphone.
わざわざ東京まで出てきて国際記者クラブに記者会見やらせるって言ったの。
I remember going all the way to Tokyo to ask them to hold a press conference for me for the international correspondence.
だから極端な話どっかの馬の骨が来たみたいなもんだから。
But they were like, "Who are you?"
はっきり断られた。
And they had to say they said no to me.
でも諦めきんにからその足で帰りに AP 通信に行った。
But I was so resolute that I could not give up. And I remember going over to AP's headquarters in Tokyo.
でもうあそこで記者会見やるのに AP 通信で何とかしてくれよ。 でもう AP 通信も簡単に返事したからな、分かりましたって、本当かよ。
And then I remember asking AP instead to hold a press conference for me. And they said yes almost too quickly. And I was wondering, I was quite suspicious of them. Why really? I thought, really? You really mean it?
そしたら2ヶ月後にもう記者会見してくださいって、記者クラブから連絡。
And then 2 months after that, I got a call from the press club saying that they would agree to do this press conference for me.
そしたらもうこの記者会見をやった後にみんな取材してて、もう世界中のメディアが止まんなかった。
And after that press conference, I mean, media after media, international outlets, many international outlets would come to me, call me to ask for interviews.
だからもう BBC もやったし、CNN もやったからもうそれやってたけどもう止まんなくなっちゃった。
I would do interviews with BBC and CNN, and after that, it was just media outlet after media outlet. They would not stop calling me for interviews.
And what do you think was so compelling about your story? What made, news outlets interested, but also personal donors from around the globe who all of a sudden wanted to get involved with what you were doing and contribute?
やっぱり一番はやっぱり動物を守ってたっていうのが一番みんなびっくりしたんだよね。
I think everyone was surprised that I was here protecting the animals.
So one question that I wanted to ask, and this comes a little bit out of the feed from the questions from the audience, but I've noticed it also in some of the media reports by foreign correspondents. They also seem to struggle a little bit why it was that you did what you did and what motivated you. And it's interesting to me that a lot of the, some of the foreign correspondents, like Mr. Pagnotta, for instance, who wrote a book about you, but also some of the people who are asking questions now, they want to know, is there a religious motivation? I haven't really heard you speak in those terms really yourself. I sense sometimes just the need to be there for the animals, also a need to really bear witness for what's going on in your town. But I haven't really heard you speak in religious terms. What gave you the strength to live through some of the difficult circumstances with those animals?
So just to state clearly, there was no religious motivation. I am not a religious person at all.
動物のためにもう人間の失敗で、全ての動物を殺すなんて俺にはもう信じないんだった。
I couldn't really believe, or I couldn't really accept the fact that because of our doings as human beings, we would have to sacrifice these animals and their livelihood.
政府が言ったあれにもものすごく憤ったわけだ。20キロ圏内の家畜はもう全て殺処分だって。もうそれにも耐えられなかったな。
And I couldn't stand the fact that there was a government mandate that within the 20-kilometer radius from Fukushima, all of the animals in that radius had to be slaughtered, and that was their mandate. And I could not accept that.
それでもやっぱり環境省とか農水省に行って争ってたわけだ。
And so I would go to the government, I would visit the environmental ministry and also the farm ministry and try to refute.
だって信じられないべ。俺東京にも出てこないのに、俺、あれだろ、国会議事堂まで行って、議員会館まで行って、国会議員と話してたわけだ。
So I would go all the way to the National Diet Building. And the building where they house the Diet members, and I would have disputes more with them.
当時はだからもう20キロ圏内の そんな話にもなんねって言われちゃう国会議員に。例えば動物どうすんだとか、こんなこと言ったって、今そんな話にもなりませんからって言われちゃう。
そんなことを話している余裕はない。
まあもうだって原発爆発してるわけだから、そんなことの話にもするあれもねって言われちゃう。
And these Diet members would say to me that, I mean, really, what the issue of what to do with the animals within the 20-kilometer radius, it's just such a small topic in comparison with what is really happening in the situation as a whole. So they wouldn't really put a lot of thought into it. It was a very trite issue in their eyes.
I would like to follow up with a question for Ms. Nakamura. And I would like to ask about the issue of public memory. You as a filmmaker are helping to shape public memory of this event and also public understanding of history as it evolved in Fukushima. And I would like you to address a question of memory in relation to historical catastrophes such as this. How do we remember those? How are they remembered in Japan? How is this disaster remembered in Japan? And what is your role in making us remember this disaster?
So I started making a film thinking, because a lot of the news reports, they just focus on like a disaster for that time, and they kind of forget about the thing like later. And Japanese have a tendency to forget like disasters very quickly, because I think we're a disaster-stricken country. We have so many disasters, and they kind of, we kind of tend to focus on things happening right in front of us. Like right now, like it's all about COVID, so I think a function of a filmmaker, especially I believe like a documentary film, just because people are coming to theater, paying their own money to watch a documentary, I think we need to provide information that's not reported on television. So I think my determination was to follow what's happening in Fukushima for like, past, I don't know how this is gonna, this is like a never-ending story, because this year is like a 10-year anniversary. So a lot of the media are going to Fukushima, but a lot of people in Fukushima are saying after 10 years, people are gonna forget, because I experienced that while I was in Fukushima. The Tokyo Olympics was decided, and they were all like clamoring, saying like, "Oh, great, we're having Olympics in Tokyo." And I just remember like Naoto and I were saying like, "Oh, we're going to be forgotten, because of the Olympics." And after, what was ironic was that because of the COVID, Tokyo Olympics was canceled. And they basically said, this is going to be a reconstruction Olympics. And they basically, opened up this new station in the no return zone. And they sort of, prepared this whole thing, ceremonious kind of thing. But it just didn't happen. So it was kind of ironic, that now they're talking about, they're still talking about doing Olympics in this situation. And now they're saying like this kind of fighting over COVID Olympics or whatever. they always come up with this excuse. And I feel that as a filmmaker, you need to kind of be objective about what's happening. And you have to say, well, I believe that you have to be able to say there's something wrong with, what the country is doing or the government's doing, that you should be able to speak up against it. And that's what I was kind of attracted about Naoto is because Naoto was able to say when this whole thing was happening after the nuclear disaster, I kept asking him actually why he remained in the nuclear zone. He said to me, you know, I didn't do anything wrong. I just stayed at my home with animals. The country did something wrong. So I'm not doing anything wrong. And I was kind of, you know, shocked. What he said was so true, but nobody was willing to say it. You know, everybody was too scared to, you know, say that the country did something wrong. And especially with the nuclear disaster, it's a man-made disaster in a way. I mean, it's precipitated by the tsunami, but, you know, just because having the nuclear power plant there by the coast is really dangerous. So anyway, so this is a kind of a long answer, but yeah.
You know, I would love to jump in here with a question that's raised in the Q&A, which is, does this disaster make either one of you think hard about whether or not nuclear power should or should not be used as a source of power, especially in this era of climate change, and whether it has opened up that conversation nationwide?
Like now they're like, I think the current Japanese government is saying that we're trying to have a clean energy, like I forgot, like until like 2050 or something. We're kind of afraid that they're going to bring up like, oh, let's do nuclear power, it's a clean energy. But, you know, Japan is such a disaster-prone country where we have so many earthquake and tsunami, and it's dangerous to have like nuclear power plant. You know, it's like putting a dangerous thing on, you know, really an insecure land. So I'm not sure about other countries, but you know, in terms of our country, it's not, you know, it's not a really safe, clean energy. That's what I think. I don't know what.
まあ、俺も最初もう反原発を歌って、俺アントニオがもう主催して、俺フランスにも行ったわけ。でフランスの原発で反原発運動やったわけ。もう俺もびっくりしたけど、あれもう事前にグリーンピースと仕組んでたんだな。
その招聘した
俺が行って、もうこれ反原発やるっていうのを、多分グリーンピースと一緒に計画してた。
そうだったんですね。
俺が行った時に、俺最初行った時に、なんであそこにカメラあんなに待機してんだって。松村お前来るの待ってたんだって。何言ってんだって。俺本来心の準備も何にもしてない。お前最初ここで記者会見なんだって。もうちょっと待ってろお前。心の準備できてんだから、ガラーって一緒でっかく車で回れ。もうそれから行く上。
そうだったんですね。I was quite vocal in speaking against nuclear power, and I remember after the Fukushima accident, going over to France because they called me over to join in a protest and a rally in France. And only after I arrived in France did I realize that this was something that was done in partnership with Greenpeace. And I arrived there, and the first thing, and I arrived to see so many cameras waiting for me. And I was so surprised and so shocked that this was happening, that when they asked me to do the press conference, and this was right from the start, they said, when I arrived, okay, we're going to do a press conference. I said, can we drive the car around a few circles or a few rounds, because I need to gather my thoughts. I'm really not prepared for this. So that's what unfolded in France.
で、もうその後にフランスの労働組合の、上の方の人、偉い人だったの。その人がオフレコだったら、2人でもうディスカッション喋っても構わないってなった。
And I remember that one of the people in the higher ranks of the, I think it was the labor union, one labor union in France, came to me and said, I would like to have a discussion with you if it is off the record, he said.
でいろいろ話してたら、やっぱりこれ、やっぱり自分の原子炉を自慢するわけ。フランスの原子炉ってあそこ国営だから。もう日本と違ってうちはパーフェクトだ。だからお前パーフェクトじゃあ次フランスだって爆発するんだって。日本もそうだからだって。もう大丈夫、安心安全ってずーっと歌ってて、とかそうやっちまうと今度それ以上はもう誰ももう心配も例えば不安全なところとか考えなくなるわけ。パーフェクトだもん。だから心の油断だわ。だからもう日本の原発だってもう安心安全を唱えすぎちゃったから。例えば津波の対処も何もみんなおごそかにしたわけだ。結果的にああいうもう大惨事を招いた。フランスもそうだった。パーフェクトだっていうの。技術も、だから次はフランスだったの。
そうおっしゃったわけですね。And I remember we did have this discussion with this member, one of the higher ups in the labor union. I remember him talking about the nuclear reactors in his own country, in France. And he was quite boastful about the way that they were technologically very up to date, perfect, he said. And I remember retorting that the fact that you say perfect is makes me think that the next accident is going to happen in France, because once you say something is perfect, that leads the way to complacency. And that's exactly what happened in Japan. The slogan or the thing that they always said about the nuclear reactors in Japan is it's safe. It's safe, it's completely safe, so there's no need to worry. And that, of course, led to complacency. Nobody did anything about the imminent tsunami that was, of course, to strike. And now we find ourselves in this situation. So I remember talking about that to him.
And I just wanted to follow up on this topic. To me, one of the interesting points in the documentary is the moment when you're at the train station, and on one side of the tracks is sort of restricted zone. The other side of the tracks, people can live. And it actually reminded me of my own birth country. I'm originally from Germany. And after Fukushima happened, the Germans decided to phase out nuclear energy, and it sounded really great, right? But where did they buy their energy? They bought it from France, which produces its electricity from nuclear energy. And France is right across the border. When I saw the scene with the train tracks, on one side it's forbidden, on one side you can live, it reminded me exactly of that. The German government reacted in the same way. They pretended everything was fine when across the border, the French are still producing nuclear energy. What was your reaction to when they open up one side of the station for a residential, so that people could come return, and the other side they keep closed, but the radiation is the same? One person in the question and answer actually asked exactly about that. Have you spoken up about this issue?
警戒区域だって最初20キロ圏内、もう30キロ圏内とかいろいろ、アメリカは最初80キロはダメだってなったわけ。でも80キロっていうと、とてつもない面積になると、人もものすごい量の人が動き出すわけ。多分国会でもそれで議論になったんだけどな、だから80キロにしたらえらいことになっちまって、関東まで人が押し寄せるかもしれなくなったわけだ。
そうですよね。
それをやっぱり考えて、もうどこに線引くかって言った時に最初もう揉めで、とりあえずもう最初になったのは20キロだった。で、まあ、その中は10万人ぐらいだけと移動するのも。
まあその程度だったら10万人でっていう。
このぐらいだったらもう、まあ、動いてもどこに行ったってもうなんとかなる。東部全部動き出しちゃったらこれはもう収まりつかないだろう。
そうですよね。Well, the fact is, my thoughts on this are this. You have to draw a line somewhere, just pragmatically speaking. And so I imagine that we ultimately decided on, the government decided on, okay, the restricted zone would be within would be the 20-kilometer radius from the Fukushima nuclear plant. Of course, there were talks about what about 30 kilometers? I mean, the United States first said 80 kilometers, but when you say the restricted zone would be 80 kilometers, that would have great repercussions on the country because so many people would have to evacuate. So I think. And I'm imagining that within the Diet, there was deliberation after deliberation, and they finally came to the resolution that, well, if we set it at a 20-kilometer radius, that means, well, about 100,000 people would have to evacuate. So maybe that's a good line to draw. That is what I imagine happened. Because if the whole Tohoku region had to evacuate, I mean, that would not be materially possible.
だからあの線引きって放射能の高い低いで決めたわけでね。まあ、結局はもう一番最初は行政区で決めたわけ。行政では割っちまうから。もう収まりつかねえから。
そうですよね。
だからもう行政区では道路挟んでこっちとこっちだって分けてとか、線路挟んでこっちとこっちって分けちゃったわけ。
そうですよね。I mean, so the only kind of pragmatic solution that you would have to arrive at is that, I mean, I don't think those lines are drawn because on the one side of the line there is less radiation and the other side there's more radiation. I mean, that's not possible. So you have no other choice then but to draw lines between the municipalities, like this side of the railroad tracks and that side of the railroad tracks and so forth.
While we're on this topic of the government having to step in and make firm choices here about where to allow people to be, where not to, where to rebuild, where not to. We have a lot of folks asking questions about your assessment of how good a job the government did here. And so one of the most basic questions is, what kind of support is the government giving to folks who are kind of resettling this nuclear zone?
Mm. その場所に。だからもう要はもう大したことねえんだって。人口10万人だって、まあ、極端な話、国が思うのはあの時全部死んじまえばいいかと。もう死ねばそれで終わりだから。生きてっから問題起きるわけだ。だって例えば10万人が全部死んでも人口から比べれば、まあ、日本の人口1億2000万としたって、もう 0. 何%なわけだ。だから国はもうこの人口が減ったって影響ないわけだ。
I really don't think they executed a sound planned execution. What they really were only able to do was just try to just stick a band-aid on whatever problem erupted at that moment. And I imagine that what the government was really thinking was that, well, I mean, if these evacuees, let's say there were 100,000 of them, if they had died in that accident, that might have actually been easier on the government because they would have not have to do much about that because it only amounts to, Japan has a population of 120 million, so it would be only 0.1% of the population. But people like me who have survived and who are causing a lot of commotion here, people like me are a nuisance to the government, I imagine.
だって最初の頃な、外国でみんなテレビでやってるわけだ、ニュースで。日本ではまだやってないのに。なんでこんなに外国では日本の20キロ圏内のニュースバンバンやってるんだって。最初外務省で問題になったっていう話聞いてると俺。
I remember that there were so many international news reports about what was happening within the 20-kilometer radius from the power plant. And I remember thinking, why are there so many international media outlets talking about this? While there was nothing that the Japanese television or media were reporting. And I remember that the foreign ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, was actually complaining about the fact that there was so much reporting going on in the international media. 実際にそういう情報があったわけですね。外務省でもいろいろ問題。
だからなんでこんなに日本の国のニュース、日本でやってるのに、ヨーロッパとかアメリカでなんでこんなの生々しい放送してんだって。
っていうんだでしょうね、そういうお
いや、まあ
話
そういう
が
話聞こえた。
聞こえてきた。I heard that, yes, there were many complaints going on in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that there were so many news reports that were coming from Europe and the United States. Well, nothing was really being reported in Japan.
I think there are several questions to Ms. Nakamura about the making of the film in the question feed. And one thing that I would like to know is sort of for the first film, you didn't really have much support from the government, none at all, but for the second film you did, and what made that possible? And also with some of the directorial choices that you made that made the first film different from the second one. I think you made some choices that where just from an aesthetic point of view or just from a technical point of view, you made different kinds of films. Like the first one, so for some of the members in the audience who haven't seen it, some of the footage of the first part of the second film were taken sort of were a summary of the first film. But we noticed, for instance, that we don't hear your voice. You're kind of observing almost from the outside. And Mr. Matsumura is almost all by himself most of the time, whereas in the second film, you were toward the end of the film, you're much more present. So can you talk a little bit about what some of your choices were in making these films from a technical and just method perspective?
So first, actually, I didn't really get any government support for the second film, really, because you know, as Naoto mentioned, this is kind of an inconvenient topic for them. They don't really want to, you know, focus on this kind of issue. So I basically, I worked as a freelancer for a major network, but I wasn't a main staff. So I was allowed to do whatever, because I know you know, people who are like a full-time staff in a major network, you know, when they try to make a story about Fukushima, they've been demoted to some other places. So it's a very scary kind of a situation with the media that it is a lot of a self-censorship. So I decided to do it by myself, basically carrying no crew, because you know, it's not a kind of place where you pay to get to, you know, to do your job, because, you know, you're subjecting yourself to a radiation. You're not like, I can't be held responsible for anybody falling ill. So basically I just, you know, took my camera and went. You mentioned about the aesthetic choice about the first and second film. First one, I basically try to be a fly on the wall, because I wanted to focus on the fact that he's kind of alone with the animals. And it's more like coming from my habit of making a television documentary, that you have to be a fly on the wall and you're not there. You're supposed to be like this anonymous kind of a presence. But as progressed and I kept going back to the place, we kind of built this relationship where we're like sort of almost like a relative, you know, like a friends. So I started interacting and I thought, well, maybe it's okay to include my presence now, because we're kind of forming this kind of a team. And actually there's another member in this team. There's also a reporter, a journalist from Kyoto Tsushin, which is like a major network, and he's been really helpful. So it's a very interesting kind of collaboration. It's almost feel like we're making a film together, like Naoto and me and the other journalist. And so I guess it kind of, you know, evolved as we went along, you know, filming. So that's why it kind of became what it became.
This is really interesting to hear. I have to say, for me, having seen the Japanese version of your sequel and then watching the accessibility enhanced version that you shared with us with subtitles and with a voiceover, these were very different experiences. What was interesting for me in the Japanese version that you shared with me prior to this event, there was also still very minimal commentary, and the accessible version really had a lot of commentary, sometimes what we were seeing on screen, but also giving the audience a little bit more background what they were actually seeing, that and what to make of what they were seeing. For you as a filmmaker, what was that experience like to see your film kind of changed in that way? And also, I want to invite the audience to perhaps put in the chat what their experience was of this accessibility enhanced version of the film, which had a lot of voiceover for the visually impaired, and then also had a lot of subtitles. But what was the experience watching that film with those features? If you want to share that in the chat, that I think Ms. Nakamura would really like to know.
So actually, it was a very strange experience because personally, I don't really like narration or voiceovers or too much explanation. But I had a friend who's born blind, and he came to watch my first film, and it didn't have all this function. But he said, like, I heard a lot of wind because it's very windy place, the where Naoto lives. And I just kind of thought, well, he has a very different perception, like, watching a film, but in a very different, he has a very different experience. So I thought this time, maybe this becomes a little bit cluttered with all this narration and voiceovers, but maybe it would help to have, all these people like who are not able to go to that place, to Fukushima, to have that experience of, visiting Fukushima. And in my perspective, and I had to do my own narration, which was a little bit a difficult experience because I'm not used to doing it, but it was an interesting experience.
Thank you for that. So, it seems like one of the things that makes this film so powerful is that on the one hand, it's addressing these massive issues of nuclear power and government control, and at the same time, it's offering such an intimate portrait of daily life in the nuclear zone. And so a lot of our questions are tackling both those ends of the spectrum, but I do want to circle back here to some of the questions that are more just about your daily experiences in the nuclear zone, Mr. Matsumura. And so specifically, a few folks are asking about your relationships to animals. So how did those change once they no longer were products? They were no longer a cow that was going to get sent to slaughter, but instead were kind of partners in what otherwise would have been a very solitary situation.
もう例えば、生き物っていうともう人間は俺一人、あとはもう犬猫とか家畜しかいないわけ。必然的に喋るのも人でなくて家畜と喋ってるわけ。犬とか猫と。朝起きて、おお、元気かとかって人間と喋ってなくて動物と喋ってるわけ。っていうとやっぱりもう家族みたいになっちまうんだよな。
I mean, when you're living day in out with these animals, it was only me. The only human there was me, and the rest was all of these animals. So I ended up talking to not human beings, but animals. It was like every morning when I woke up, the first thing I would say was "Good morning" to the cats and dogs. So they were more like family, really. They became like family to me.
And that brings us perhaps to another question that we've gotten several times in the Q&A, which is about your human family. So how did your closest family members respond to your choice to remain in the nuclear zone?
いや、昔から俺には何も言わない。俺がこうだって言ったら、親父も袋も、あ、そうかって。
My immediate family never really refutes what I have to say or the decisions that I make. So when I decided to remain in Fukushima, both my mother and father were like, "Oh, is that so? Okay."
多分言ったら聞かないっていうのは分かってるから。
They knew that I wouldn't listen to their advice anyway.
That sounds like family.
And I actually wanted to ask a question that somebody in the audience would like to know about, and that is, what was the hardest thing mentally or physically that you encountered over the past 10 years? And what was the happiest moment or the moment that moved you the most? Imai-san, could you maybe unmute yourselves?
Sorry, okay, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. どうぞどうぞ。電気がない状態
電気がない状態で2年間生きてたわけだ。
そうですよね。
いや、そのやっぱりもう、なんていうかもう電気がない生活ってどのぐらい大変だ。
Well, the first thing that you realize is that you're left with absolutely no utilities. There's no electricity, there's no running water, there's no gas. And so I had to survive without any electricity for 2 years. And I realized that, oh, this is what it means to have no electricity.
最初はガソリンも大変だったし、もうすべてにおいて食い物も大変だし、もう何でもありとあらゆるものを食えるものを食ったから。
And so, yeah, just to get the gasoline, or just to procure the gasoline or procure anything edible, that was a feat.
いや、放射能を気にして食っちゃったんだと。放射能を気にしながら。
気にしながらね、そうですよね。So I would eat anything that I could eat while still worrying about whether this food is irradiated or not, of course.
で、一番感動したっていうのが、いろんなニュースで知ったアメリカ人の人が、もう募金を集めてやるって、それ、アメリカ人、日本在住のアメリカ人のおばさんに通してその話を聞いたんだけど、だからある時にそのお金を松村さんに持ってきたいんだって。でそのおばあさんが俺のところにメール、電話でもうコンタクト取ってきたわけ。で20キロ圏内には行かんから、郡山だって。
で、来てくれたんですか、郡山まで。
郡山でこのおばあさんが来てくれるわけ。
アメリカから。
仙台在住のアメリカ人。
仙台在住の方で、そういう情報を聞きつけて、私が集めてるんで。
アメリカ人の人が集めてて、その人が、昔アメリカ在いた時のこの、なんか知り合いかなんかで、この通訳を頼まれたわけ。アメリカ人。代理で私が預かってんだ。で、なぜかその人が預かってきたのは4万円だ。で、それがもう松村さんで間違いなかったら、あとのこれ一括して全部振り込んでやるっていう話で、仙台のおばあさんが来たわけ、アメリカ人のおばあさん。
アメリカ人がね。
で、その時にいろいろな話聞かせられた。その募金はもういろんな人からもらってる。で、その彼女の仕事がセラピストなの。刑務所。刑務所で松村さんのことを話したんだ。だから私がそんな話聞いたって、こっから出れないから、何にもできないんだ。聞かせてもできない。できるのは少しくらいのドネーションだ。だから1セントだか5セントだか分かんない。極端な話。でもその人の募金までありますよって言われた。日本的にはもう半分うるうるだったな。
でもちょっと整理させてください。その仙台で会ってくれた人はアメリカ
の人で日本の仙台に住んでる。
仙台在住ね。
でその人はそのアメリカ人の人とどういうやり取りをしてたかわかんないけど、じゃあ私がその代わりに
代理で受け取ります。
もうちょっと4万円だけ受け取って、俺を確認しに来たわけ。
なるほどね。
本当にこの人が松村さんでこの人なのかっていうのを確認
をして、とりあえずその
間違いないってなって、あと1ヶ月で300万してる。
なるほどね。So, in terms of what was good that has transpired throughout these 10 years, the one that sticks out in my memory is the donations that I've received from Americans. And there was this one particular person who lives in Sendai, but she had caught wind of the fact that there were many donations that were being raised in the United States. And she had been in contact with this person who was raising all these donations. So this person, of course, was living in the United States. This person was a therapist, she was a prison therapist, she or he was. And this go-between who lived in Sendai told me that this therapist said she would share these stories about myself with the prisoners that she worked with. And when the prisoners heard about my story, they would say that there's really nothing I can do because I'm in prison here, I'm incarcerated, but what I can do is perhaps donate a little money to Mr. Matsumura. I think it could have been 1 cent, maybe it was 5 cents, I don't know. But this go-between who lived in Sendai came to me because she had to verify that it was actually me. She came to me, she said, well, I do have 40,000 yen first that I can hand you in person. And so once that was verified that I was me, then the rest was wired, and that was in to the amount of 3 million yen. So that was all the donations that were funded. So that sticks out in memory, yes.
All right, well, it's hard to believe that we are nearing the end of our time already. We have so many questions still that we are itching to ask, but we'll try to limit ourselves to just a few more big ones here before we all have to say goodbye. One major question that has come up here for Mr. Matsumura from an audience member who themselves grew up very close to a nuclear power plant is, what is the one most important thing that those of us who live close to power plants, those of us who hear about them, who know about them, what can we be doing to fight the nuclear industry so that Fukushima and Chernobyl don't happen again?
And I want to add to this, I think where we are in Raleigh, there is a nuclear power plant that's very similar in type to the Daiichi nuclear reactor. So we have one that's
very relevant question.
I don't know how many kilometers away from us. It looks just like the one that's in your town.
声を大にして騒いでねえと、だからもう安心安全を歌っちまったらもうそれ以上進化しないわけだから。だからみんなが騒いでれば、まあそれに対処しねえから。黙っといて、例えばもうこの発電所がもう安心安全でしょ、絶対問題ありませんとかってやってれば、それ以上もうなんちゅうかもういろんなことに対してもうこれからもしこういうことが予想されないかっていうことを予想しなくなるわけ。自然災害でこんなこと起きるんじゃないかなって、そんなことを考えなくなるわけ。だからやっぱりいつも周りにいる人は声を大にして何かあったら騒いで、まあ、常にもうこういうことあったらどうするんだとかって、まあ、少しそうやっていつも危機感を与えておかないと、相手らが勝手にもう安心安全神話作っちゃって、もう国民をもう地域住民を安心させて、いざとなったらこの手術だと、全て失ってみんな終わりだ。
ありがとうございます。I would say that just continue to raise your voice. You have to be the voice of what if. What I mean by that is, when the powers that be say that it's safe, there's no need to worry and so forth, I mean, that, as I said before, leads to complacency. And there will be no contingency planning once we all think it's safe and once we're kind of swept into that story. So always, always be the voice of what if this or that happens. Because if you think it's safe and something like this happens, something like what we experienced in Fukushima happens, you're left with absolutely nothing.
アメリカなんかな、例えばテロリストのビルに突っ込んだわけだ、飛行機で。あんなこと原子力発電所に突っ込まっちゃら、とてつもない事故になるわけだ。
そうですよね。
原爆で一緒になっちまうかもしれない。
そうですよね。原爆っておっしゃいますね。I mean, one possible what if I would like to say or mention was, for example, what if something like 9/11 happened at a nuclear power plant somewhere in the United States, or well, somewhere. I mean, that would be a catastrophe on the scale of an atomic bomb, I think. So it's these kind of things that we have to keep in mind.
Thank you. That's very powerful advice, to be the voice of what if. Barbara, can I hand it over to you for a final question or two?
Sure. Now, all of us are affected by the COVID pandemic around the globe. And we're curious to hear, in the film at the very end, COVID is present actually in the film. But we wanted to hear at this moment, and since the pandemic started, how has the COVID pandemic affected your life in Tomioka? Perhaps not just whether or not COVID is present in Tomioka, but also the way that people relate to you. Has it made people understand your position better, your experience better, or has it turned the attention away from what's going on in Fukushima?
まあ、ほとんどもう老人だから周りにいるの。でもやっぱりもう年寄りってやっぱりもうコロナを異常に嫌ってるな。
そうですよね。警戒しますよね。
だから逆に今まで例えば中村監督が食ったらみんな喜んでたんだ、本当は。
そうですよね。
ところが今この間一回来たら逃げちゃった。で今度俺は怒らっちゃうわけだ。なんで連れてきたんだ。でもう東京イコールコロナだから。あの時の反対よ、原発イコール来んなって20キロ圏内の人は外に出てからって嫌われたわけ。
そうですよね。
これが今逆転した、コロナは。
A very kind of interesting phenomenon has transpired actually, because in our hometown there are a lot of elderly, I mean mainly it's the elderly people, and of course very reasonably so, they are very wary and worried about the virus. And so back then when Mayu-san started filming, she was welcomed, but now because she's from Tokyo, everybody runs away and they blame me for bringing her to Fukushima because they associate Tokyo with the COVID virus. And it was exactly the reverse situation years ago, because anybody who came out of that 20-kilometer radius, people like us would be avoided. We were, I don't know, irradiated or radioactive or something, but now it's like it's almost like we have traded places.
Joanna, do you want to ask some final questions?
Sure, I would love to pose just one final question to Ms. Nakamura. You know, this film offers so many vivid lessons about the fragility of human dominance over nature, about human resilience and the resilience of nature, nature's will to keep coming back, to keep, you know, the images of fertility in this film of animals and plants growing through the cracks, even in this scene that to human eyes might look like desolation. There are so many themes we can pick up on here. What to you makes this such a powerful story, and one that feels important to bring not just to Japanese audiences, but indeed to audiences around the world.
Actually, in the beginning, I didn't know what the film is going to be like. It was just hard enough just going there because, as Naoto said, there was no running water, nothing. But as I kind of started to film, as I said before, like I grew up in a city, I never been close to nature, and I was kind of moved by cows giving birth and cats giving birth, and I started to think, the tragedy of Fukushima is because Fukushima is really abundant with nature and is an agricultural place. It's not an industrial area, so a lot of the farmers and rice farmers and those people like really suffered. They're still suffering because they, even after they screen for the radiation and the products are clean, they still like they can only sell them really cheap. So I thought, we kind of tainted the nature, including animals. And I thought, these animals and nature are innocent, like we tainted them, contaminated them, and they're not really at fault. So I just felt like I need to kind of address that, but not in a didactic way, because I've seen so many documentaries and films about Fukushima in like a really didactic and preachy that I didn't really like personally, because people in Fukushima are not like that. Actually, Naoto and the old couple Hangai, they're really funny. Actually, they're not. I don't think they see themselves as a victim, which makes them really, different. They're not just enduring. They're kind of, living day to day, having fun, living with the animals as family. And I kind of learned a lesson from them. Just, you know, just sort of take it as it comes, and whatever happens, sort of enjoy life, when it's given. And even if it's contaminated, and it was kind of yes, very difficult question, but it's like, why do we have a right to kill these animals because they are contaminated? And just because we are humans as well, like because we're exposed to radiation, that means that we can't propagate, or we can't do things. And that's a really difficult question. Some people said that to me, like, why do you go there? Like, you're going to be exposing yourself to radiation. And that same question goes to people from Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Actually, we had a screening with the students from the University of Nagasaki. And they're not necessarily the descendants of the people who have been exposed to the the nuclear radiation, but some of them are, they're like maybe a fourth or fifth generation. So they've been discriminated against, and so it's a kind of an interesting experience to see where the discrimination comes from, in terms of radiation, as well as, now we're in a COVID crisis. Now the, Tokyo people are like discriminated against just because we are considered as a COVID carrier. So I think having kind of made this film and having this experience kind of made me aware, you have to be really objective about your paranoia about like invisible threat like radiation or COVID, you know, how people kind of react to it like irrationally, like, you know, you're tainted, contaminated with COVID or radiation, you know, you have to really sort of keep a clear mind.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us tonight and for sharing with us an opportunity for our audiences to watch this amazing film. So it's always hard to wrap up a conversation like this, as is evidenced by the fact that we went 10 minutes over here. But we are so grateful for you taking the time to be here with us tonight. And it feels like a serious perk of the virtual age that we are in, that our audiences here in North Carolina and around the US can be in direct conversation with you in Japan. That's pretty remarkable. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of our audience members for being here tonight. And we hope to see you all soon again at another event.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to reiterate Joanna's words of thanks. This was really fantastic. And thank you so much for making this possible. It was a really wonderful opportunity to meet you both. And I just wanted to alert you that there were some questions in the chat. Apparently some people signed up late and they haven't been able to watch the film yet. And I know that you were planning to change the access to the film. And I was wondering if they could still watch it this evening.
I'll keep it like available until like 5th, which is like a today. So if they watch it like, I don't know, 24 hours from now, like they should be able to watch it. As long as they, you know, promise won't kind of put it on the YouTube, you'll circulate. Just watch it among yourselves.
Because I think some folks who were here for the conversation got excited about it and will now want to watch it.
So folks, make sure that you watch it within 24 hours because that's your last opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful to meet you.
Very much. And it was wonderful to meet you.
Thank you. Nice meeting you too.
I hope once this is all over, I always travel to Japan at least once a year. And I hope that once the COVID pandemic is over, I'll get a chance to meet you both at some time.
Yeah, we're looking forward.
Naoto-san says, yes, please, we welcome you. Please do come.
Thank you very much.
All right, good night.